Elementus regamus proelium. These words are more than a mere phrase engraved on a crest or embroidered on regimental colors. These words are a pledge made for future service, but founded on exemplary service in the past. Beginning with their service in the First World War, these dragon soldiers of the Chemical Corps have used their training and equipment to rule the battle through the elements. From the muddy trenches of France to the global war on terror, they have fought and continue to fight with valor and heroism. Today, we recognize the service of the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion. Seeking neither glory nor grandeur, these men cleared the way for the Allied advance through Western Europe during the final year of World War II. Originally, the mortar was designed for firing chemical shells, but both Allied and Axis forces in World War II observed policies against first use of chemical weapons. So the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion served in its secondary role, which was to provide conventional indirect fire support to frontline infantry troops. The 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion used its 4.2-inch mortars to fire white phosphorus shells for smoke screening and high explosive for casualty effect. Lieutenant Colonel Wesley B. Hamilton, who assumed command of the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion and successfully guided them through Normandy, northern France, the Ardennes, and the Rhineland and Central European campaigns, said, "The history of this battalion contains many deeds of valor on the part of individual members of this organization. Yet standing high is the record of the entire battalion of 672 officers and men, together with all former members and reinforcements, who have performed all duties and tasks as a team in an unsurpassed manner." Once basic training requirements were completed, the battalion departed by rail and boat from Camp Swift, Texas on 11 April 1944. After stops in Greenock, Scotland, and the English cities of Port Sunlight and Stonehenge, the battalion finally arrived in France on 29 June 1944. Bravo Company of the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion ran into trouble on high seas when their ship was struck by either a mine or a torpedo. The explosion on the ship tore loose hatches and dumped men into the hold below among the motor vehicles, many of which were loaded with high explosives. The hold filled with water and oil and threatened to engulf the men. Captain Edward M. Overbeck, along with Corporal Russell E. Darlington, Sergeant James R. Mock, and Lieutenant Warren B. Hinchcliffe, Jr., descended into the hold of the rapidly sinking ship in an effort to search for men who were unaccounted for. Captain Overbeck immediately took control of his men and all those from other units. Disregarding his personal safety, he went into the hold and directed the safe removal of more than 50 wounded men and made sure that every man was safely aboard the LST that pulled alongside to their rescue. The company went back to England to regroup, while the rest of the battalion continued on to France as part of the post-D-Day operation. Captain Overbeck, Lieutenants Hinchcliffe and Fort, Sergeant Mock, and Corporals Darlington and Wilcox all received the Bronze Star for bravery in action. The 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion's first mission was with 8th Corps, and they went into combat immediately. During this time, the battalion fired more than 11,500 rounds of high explosive and white phosphorus mortar ammunition in close support of 5 different divisions. Although created for combat support, chemical battalions found themselves at times in something other than a supporting role. The experience of Alpha Company of the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion from 6 to 7 July 1944 is a prime example. On D+25, Alpha Company docked in the man-made harbor of the Utah beachhead, surrounded by the floating hulks of other ships that never reached the shore. The company was ordered in to support the 358th and 359th Regiments of the 90th Infantry Division. The infantry's attack was scheduled for early morning on 3 July 1944. Through the day, the mortar crews of Alpha Company labored as never before and succeeded in opening a pathway for the hard-fighting infantry. They fired 7 different smoke missions while the infantry forced a bridgehead across the Sèvres River. An eyewitness report on the effectiveness of the firing said, "Machine guns and rifles were blasted all over the place and you couldn't begin to count the dead crowds." But the best gauge of the effectiveness of the mortar fire was the speed by which the infantry battalions were able to advance, half a mile in half an hour. Later, many captured Germans wanted to see this automatic artillery that was so devastating, both in its accuracy and its rapid rate of fire. 2 separate infantry division commanders singled out Alpha Company for commendation for superior battle performance, and likewise, the commander of the 30th Infantry Division commended Alpha Company's devotion to duty for their effective mortar support during the German counteroffensive. The battalion went on to northern France and contributed greatly to the ultimate capture of Saint-Malo, Dinard, and Cap Frahal during the period of 1 to 17 August 1944. 2 officers and 2 enlisted men of the battalion were in the party of American officials who took the surrender of Colonel von Auloch at the Citadel at Saint-Malo. The plan was formulated to have the mortar companies fire white phosphorus on the Citadel. On 16 August, Charlie Company fired hundreds of rounds of white phosphorus. During the period of 24 August to 19 September 1944, the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion provided an extremely high volume of accurate, close-in supporting fire and played a significant role in the fall of Brest and the capture of the Crozon Peninsula. It was there that the German prisoners of war nicknamed the white phosphorus shell Whispering Death. Whispering Death is a name given to the 4.2-inch mortars by the enemy because the shell could not be heard while in flight. On 15 September, the final assault of the battle at Brest began, with the city surrendering the following day. The 2nd Infantry Division cited the effectiveness of the 4.2-inch mortar in street fighting situations. The mortars were able to fire accurately over tall buildings and render support within 100 yards of the front lines. In the battle at Brest, France, a device that Staff Sergeant Joseph Terry invented was used successfully. Terry invented an aiming stake, later patented by the Army, which was designed to fire mortars with greater accuracy at night. He later received a battlefield commission. During a prolonged artillery barrage, a direct hit on an ammunition shed detonated white phosphorus and high explosive shells. As a newly commissioned lieutenant, Terry ran through flying particles of burning phosphorus and smoke to warn nearby troops, who were able to flee just in time. Then Lieutenant Terry heard someone crying for help. This was coming from one of his own men, Tekfor Blekus, who was unable to walk. Terry took Blekus on his shoulders, carried him down the stairs and through the building, which was now a blazing inferno. 6 men were saved from certain death due to the gallantry and devotion of Lieutenant Joseph Terry. Lieutenant Terry served in both Charlie and Delta companies of the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his heroic action. The 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion supported the 28th Infantry Division in the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. This was the only time in the battalion's history that it was committed to the support of just one division at a time. The battalion received a commendation from the commanding general of the 28th Infantry Division because of its exemplary and heroic work with the attack on the town of Schmidt. 1 December 1944 marked the battalion's 150th day of continuous combat and the firing of the 100,000th round of ammunition in support of all combat operations thus far. During the Battle of the Bulge from 17 December 1944 to 16 February 1945, the battalion again distinguished itself through superb fighting prowess by aiding in the reinforcement of the left flank, thereby holding the enemy and preventing penetration of friendly lines. Columns of Nazi tanks teamed with infantry rolled toward their lines, but each time they were halted as the battalion delivered constant and deadly accurate white phosphorus and high explosive mortar fire. The white phosphorus blinded and burned the Nazis. Tank drivers lost their sense of direction and errantly ran into other tanks, dismounted infantry, and ditches. The German attack lost momentum and was forced into retreat. At times during this period, division artillery, armor, and infantry were able to withdraw under Charlie Company's protective fire. Fire which was largely responsible for holding up the enemy advance and almost solely responsible for the safe manner in which these withdrawals were effected. After the enemy's retreat, the battalion was relieved from combat for the purpose of reorganization and was then redesignated the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion with a headquarters company and 3 weapons companies. The Rhineland and Central European campaigns were the last campaigns for the battalion in World War II. The battalion supported the 5th Corps in the final assault on the Rohr River defenses and the advance to the Rhine. When the Remagen bridgehead was established, Alpha and Bravo companies were attached to 7th Corps to assist in holding and expanding the bridgehead while preparations for the breakthrough were being made. Units of the battalion then assisted in closing the Ruhr pocket, while the remainder helped in the drive across Germany. Alpha Company was supporting the 69th Infantry Division when the division made contact with elements of Russian infantry, who eventually severed Germany in half and virtually ended the war. On 28 April 1945, all companies in the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion were relieved from the line, and on 1 May, the entire battalion moved to Eschbach, Germany, assuming an entirely new role, that of security, charged with the mission of protecting installations, materiel, and contraband. It was in Eschbach, Germany, that the unit celebrated VE Day. On 13 June 1945, the battalion, having previously moved to Czechoslovakia, departed en route to Camp Lucky Strike, France, and then headed home to the United States for a much-deserved 30-day leave. After their furloughs, they were sent to Camp Campbell, Kentucky, to prepare for the planned invasion of Japan. Jack Deasy of San Francisco, the unit's former adjutant, said, "We got to Camp Campbell on 10 July 1945. Fortunately, they dropped the atomic bomb and ended the war while we were at Camp Campbell." The 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion fired a total of 152,257 rounds of high explosive and white phosphorus ammunition and accumulated a total of 315 days in combat during their 11 months of service in Europe. They traveled across France, Belgium, Germany, and Czechoslovakia while attached to 3 different armies, 7 Army Corps, and 27 different divisions. When infantry units were taken off the line for rest, the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion was nearly always reattached to a fresh division, remaining on the front lines until, in the words of one combat mortarman, we became part of the terrain. They served with honor and valor in all the 5 major battles of the European theater of operations. Of the 817 men that saw service with the battalion, 40 were killed in action, 336 wounded, and 198 were awarded decorations for bravery. The men of the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion were initially authorized the shoulder sleeve insignia of the 1st Army and later of the 3rd Army. But it was Private First Class Robert Schnell from 1st Platoon Alpha Company who created an unauthorized version. He stated, "We never had an official 86th mortar patch, so I designed the skunk patch. I added the mortar shell and 4.2 to it. I had them distributed. We weren't supposed to wear them, but I think some of the boys did anyway." Several designs for a distinctive insignia were proposed after the war, including some suggested by the mortarmen themselves, but none were officially produced. One reason stated for this was the lack of an official battalion history. The story of the 86th Chemical Mortar Battalion is one worth telling, and is one that demands to be preserved. These dragon soldiers exemplified the proud tradition of the Chemical Corps, and their values of sterling service, selfless sacrifice, and dedication to duty are timeless. It was through their heroism and willingness to pay the ultimate price that future generations could breathe the air of freedom. By remembering these qualities, we are forced to uphold them, take them as our own, and strive toward excellence. Beginning in 1989, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps has honored those within its own ranks who have performed their duty in an exemplary manner. These individuals have dedicated their lives to the service of our nation through their committed work with the United States Army Chemical Corps. During their years of service, these men and women have upheld the high standards of their predecessors and have mentored and inspired new generations of soldiers and civil servants who continue their work into the 21st century.